The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Today's webinar is on the quality of life survey, and I'm really glad all of you out there can attend this. Feel free to ask questions as we go along. You can either ask a question by raising your hand icon and asking the question yourself, or typing the question into the question box. Just note that if you raise your hand and you're asking the question yourself, you do need to have a microphone on your phone. Otherwise, just type the question in the question box. I'm going to begin the survey by going over some background information, some general information, and some specific information and reminders about completing the quality of life survey. And then we'll go over the survey in detail. And like I said, feel free to ask questions as we go along. As transition specialists, our main goal is to assist people in transitioning from institutional settings to smaller, more personal community settings. And I think everyone would agree that in most situations, living in smaller community settings where the individual chooses to live almost always leads to an improved quality of life. The Quality of Life Survey, also known as the QOL, is an important part of our jobs as transition specialists. The Quality of Life Survey is a critical component in our efforts to show that people's quality of life is much higher when they're living in the community. Through the QOL, we're collecting proof. We're collecting data that shows that people really are better off living in a community setting, and proof that we need to continue our efforts to remove the barriers that are keeping people in nursing homes and other institutions. The Quality of Life Survey is a tool that's specifically designed to measure a person's quality of life, both in the institutional setting and once again after they've transitioned back into the community. The QOL measures the individual's quality of life in 7 specific domains. Next slide. The Quality of Life surveys are a great way for people to voice their thoughts and feelings regarding their living situations and the services they're receiving. I guarantee you that every single Quality of Life survey is reviewed in detail. It's reviewed by us here at NILE, and then we pass the surveys on to the Department of Health, where they review them again, and the results are compiled, analyzed, and sent to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It's important to remember that the QOL, the Quality of Life Survey, is a way for New York State to help evaluate the programs and the services. It helps to determine what's working and what's not working. From the beginning of Open Doors, that's from the fall of 2014 until last week, we have completed 3,875 surveys. That's an incredible amount of data that's been collected and analyzed. The QOL is a confidential document, and all transition specialists need to sign a confidentiality pledge. The confidentiality pledge is found in the resource section of the database, and it needs to be signed by all of you and uploaded into your My Profile section of the database. If you have any trouble finding either the pledge or where to upload it to, just let us know here at NILE and we'll be happy to help you with that. Now, I just want to go over some general information about the survey. We'll review these points again when we go over the survey in detail, but this information is important, so I want to go over it ahead of time as well. To begin with, the Quality of Life survey must be completed for all qualified transitions. As transition specialists, we work with everyone, whether or not they end up being considered a qualified transition. However, we only complete Quality of Life surveys for qualified transitions. To be considered a qualified transition, the participant needs to meet our eligibility criteria. They need to have an informed and accepted, assigned and accepted informed consent form. They need to have Medicaid for at least 1 day prior to leaving the institution. They need to have been in the institution for at least 90 days at the time of their discharge, and they need to have transitioned to a qualified setting and transitioned from a qualified setting. If you're ever unsure as to whether or not you need to do a QOL, just contact us here at NILE. Someone's usually always here, or you can just do the survey. It's always better to do the survey and not need it than to not do it and miss it. Surveys are voluntary. Participants can refuse to complete either the entire survey or any part of it. People can and do participate in open doors and do not do the surveys. If that's their choice, then we honor that. You can find a copy of the QOL, a blank copy, in the resource tab of the database under TS resources. And there are two types of surveys that we do here at Open Doors: a baseline survey and an 11-month follow-up survey. Now, just a few things about the baseline surveys. Baseline surveys always measure the participants' quality of life while they're in the institution. Again, baseline surveys must be completed for all qualified transitions. Baselines can be completed up to 90 days prior to the transition. That's 3 months before the person moves, or up to 14 days, 2 weeks after they've transitioned. But regardless of where they are at the time you complete the baseline always measures the participant's quality of life while they're in the institution. And because of this, we encourage we encourage you to complete all baseline surveys while the person's still in the institution. If someone has a cognitive deficit, it may very well be very difficult for them to understand that all of these questions you're asking them are not about the apartment they just moved into. It's about the institution that they moved out of. So if at all possible, I would suggest doing the baseline, usually as soon as you find housing. Once the participant has housing, they almost always transition within the next 90 days, and that's a great time to do the baseline. The 11-month follow-up survey is the second kind of survey that we do. The 11-month follow-up survey is completed 11 months after the participant has transitioned, more or less. You need to complete the entire survey when you do an 11-month follow-up survey. You need to ask every question on the survey. For baselines, there are 2 modules that you skip over, but for 11-month surveys, you need to ask every question. 11-month surveys are completed 30 days before the due date or up to 90 days after the due date. 11-month surveys, I want to also point out that 11-month surveys are completed even if the participant has been re-institutionalized, which means even if the participant has been readmitted to a nursing home or now lives in a 12-bed group residence or in the hospital, we still need to complete the survey. Next slide. So who should you be completing the survey with? If at all possible, the QOL should be completed with the participant. It's their experience we're measuring and documenting, and if possible, they should be the ones completing the survey. Sometimes the participant may need assistance with some or all of the questions, and that's fine. If that's the case, the survey can be completed with the participant and someone assisting. And lastly, if the participant is unable to complete the survey, it can be completed by proxy, by someone else on the participant's behalf. So when should a proxy be used? A proxy should only be used if the participant is unable to complete the survey, even with assistance. For example, someone with advanced dementia may not be able to answer any of those questions. So that person you would need to use a proxy for if that is the case. Sometimes a guardian would rather complete the survey themselves, or they have someone else in the family or someone else they know who's involved that they would like to complete the survey. And if a guardian requests that the survey be completed by proxy, by someone other than the participant, we always honor the guardian's request. Try to keep in mind, if you're using a proxy or someone to assist the participant, try to use someone who knows the participant, who's familiar with both the participant and the situation. Regardless of which scenario you use, you should always try to complete the survey in person. Even if you're using a proxy, if possible, try to complete the survey in person with the participant and the proxy. That being said, sometimes despite our efforts, a proxy may not want or may not be able to meet in person. So if you're completing a survey by proxy, it is permissible to complete the survey over the phone. This is the only situation when surveys can be completed over the phone. Otherwise, they need to be completed in person.
Laurie, I have a question that came in for you.
Okay.
If they have been re-institutionalized, do they answer the questions as if they were if they were home, or as they are now in the institution for the 11-month QOLs?
Excellent question. You would answer the question according to where they are at the time of the survey. If they've been reinstitutionalized and they're now back in the nursing home, then you would answer the questions as if they're back in the nursing home. For participants in the OPWDD system, the Office for Persons with Developmental Disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities who are served through that service system, staff members are allowed to assist participants when completing surveys. And if necessary, OPWDD staff can complete the survey by proxy on behalf of the participant. Keep in mind, however, when you're using OPWDD staff as a proxy or to assist, the surveys cannot be completed over the phone. You need to meet the participant and you need to meet with the OPWDD staff person. So next, I'm going to go over a few tips on completing the survey. Like I said, the survey is meant to be conducted in person. Conduct the survey like a conversation. Read the questions, but keep in mind that you're likely going to need to repeat, rephrase, or explain some of the questions as you go along. The participants we work with have varying needs and abilities, and you'll frequently need to explain some of the questions, what they mean and what exactly you're asking. Make sure to ask every question on the survey and don't leave any blanks. It's okay to check don't know if the participant doesn't know the answer to the question, or if they don't know how to answer a question, or if they're just not understanding the question, even after you've tried to rephrase and explain it. Just check don't know. And of course, if they don't feel comfortable at answering any of the questions, just put refused, and that's perfectly okay. I want to point out that there are several instances when you only need to complete the first 3 pages of the survey. If someone refuses to complete the survey, if the survey's been missed, you were unable to complete it within the allowable time frame, or if when you go to do an 11-month survey, you found that the individual is deceased, has died, then you would only need to complete the first 3 pages of the survey and upload them into the database. Now, survey dates. We have found many errors and a lot of confusion on the survey dates, so I want to go over this. I'll go over this again on the survey, but I wanted to go over it ahead of time because of the difficulties we've had with this. One of the very first questions on the survey is the date of the interview. For surveys that you've completed or for surveys where the person has refused, it's easy. Just use the date you completed the survey or the day the person refused and said, you know, I don't want to do this survey. Just put the date that they were completed or refused. For missed surveys, it's a little bit different. If a survey has been missed, which means you were not able to complete it within the allowable time frame, hopefully you'll be able to complete the surveys, but it does happen. So if the survey has been missed and you were not able to complete it within the allowable time frames, both in the database and on the surveys, the date should be the date the survey was considered missed. For baseline surveys, they've been missed on the 15th day after transition. We have 14 days after transition to complete the survey, and on the 15th day, it's been missed. The 15th day is the date you would use for the date of the interview. For 11-month follow-up surveys that have been missed, the date of the interview is always the 91st day after the due date. We have 90 days after the due date to complete the survey, and on the 91st day, it's been officially missed, and that's the date you would use for the date of the interview. Again, this can be confusing, especially at first, so feel free to give us a call here at NILE, and we're happy to walk you through this. Now, last, but certainly not least of the things I want to talk about before we go over the actual survey is potential abuse or neglect. The quality of life survey contains many questions, and sometimes participants will answer questions in a way that could indicate potential abuse or neglect, or they could share additional information that could indicate abuse or neglect. So to start with, if you are ever completing a survey and someone shares information that indicates that they could be or they are in immediate or ongoing danger, you need to report it to an appropriate person immediately. And if needed, call it into the appropriate hotline or agency listed at the end of the presentation. The bottom line is, if somebody is ever in immediate danger, you need to report it immediately. And again, you can always call us here at NILE for guidance. Secondly, anytime a participant answers a question or shares information on this survey that could potentially indicate abuse or neglect, you will need to report it to the appropriate person and fill in Module 10 on the survey. For individuals who are in a nursing home or who you're doing a baseline survey and they've just been transitioned from a nursing home, you would report incidents in the nursing home to the nursing home discharge planner, the social worker, the director of nursing, or the administrator. It has to be someone in an administrative capacity. If the person is in the community and receiving services through the TBI, the Traumatic Brain Injury Waiver, or the Nursing Home Transition and Diversion Waiver, you'd report instances of potential abuse or neglect to the service coordinator. For those in the community and receiving services through MLTC, Medicaid long-term care, you'd report it to the care manager. And for participants in the OPWDD system, you'd report it to the residence manager, the care manager, or the ICF contact person, the intermediate care facility contact person. And again, any questions, call us here at NILE. Instances of possible abuse or neglect must be reported within 7 days. You might be doing these surveys 3 months ahead of time. You have 90 days before someone leaves a nursing home, but you don't want to wait 3 months to report any possible indication of abuse or neglect. It needs to be done within 7 days. And instances of possible abuse or neglect need to be reported regardless of when the incident occurred and regardless of when the participant report or what the participant reports has already been done. So if someone says, I had, $100 stolen out of my wallet 2 years ago, but they caught the guy and fired him, you still need to report that because he reported it to you or she, you need to report it on. When you report it, you need to actually speak to the person you're reporting the concerns to. You can't just leave a message. I know how hard it is to get a hold of some of these care managers and case managers and service coordinators, but we have to actually talk to them. You can, however, do an email notification. That is acceptable if there's an actual exchange between yourself and the person you're contacting. If this is the case, you can cut and paste the exchange into a contact note in the database. You'll need to show who you emailed, what you said, and what their response was. You can't just say emailed social worker. Again, any problems, questions, concerns, just give us a call here at NILE. So now we are finally ready to complete the survey. Page 1. Please do not write on the top of the page. We here at NILE review every single survey that is entered into the database, and we have to number them and label them. And we do use this space to do that. If you'd like to write the name on the survey, because unfortunately the name is not actually on the first or even the second page of the survey, a great place to do that is right under the MFP logo. The first page goes over some of the general information that I've already talked about. It discusses the baseline, the 11-month, the time frames. It has all of this information right here on the first page of the survey. The second page of the survey looks at instructions on how to administer the survey. It gives you a sample for introducing the survey if you'd like to use that. And at the bottom of the page, if you look, there's a space for your name, the transition specialist. And then right under that is the date of the interview. And remember, if the survey's completed, you just write the day you completed it. And if the survey was refused, you write the day the person refused it in the space at the bottom of the page. If the survey's been missed, it's a little bit different. If a baseline has been missed, the date would be 15 days after the transition date. And if an 11-month has been missed, the date would be 91 days after the 11-month was due. And make sure to write missed next to the date so it's clear that the survey's been missed. Later on in this presentation, I'm going to ask you not to write side comments on the QOL, but this is one case where we are asking you after the date, if the survey's been missed, write missed so it's clear that it's been missed. The next page of the survey is really important. Page 3 of the survey must be thoroughly and accurately completed for all surveys. And for baseline surveys, page 3 of the survey must match the status tab in the database. The next slide.
Laurie, we've got a request to slow down a bit.
Oh, okay. I'll be happy to. Thank you for letting me know. The next slide is a copy of the status tab in the database. And the fields underlined in red for any baseline survey need to match what's on the baseline. All of those fields underlined in red need to be completed for all surveys, but for baselines, they need to match what's in the status tab. Next slide.
We might have a question, I'm not sure. I'm going to open up the line for Kathy Sheehan. Do you have a question?
No,
Hi,
it was the test. It was about to slow down a bit.
Okay.
Patrick, did you have a question? No, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, this is page 3 of the survey. Page 3 contains vital information about the person being surveyed, and it must be completed in its entirety, and it must be completed thoroughly, and it must be completed correctly. And for all baseline surveys, it needs to match what's in the database. For 11-month surveys, things may have changed, but for baselines, it needs to match. You need to have the Medicaid number. You cannot leave this blank. You're going to have to look up the Medicaid number and write it in. The transition date and the informed consent date need to match for every survey that you put in. It needs to match the database, the date of transition and the informed consent date. These spaces cannot be left blank. For the transition date, you cannot put to be determined. Sometimes you'll be doing these surveys before the person transitions, so you're going to need to come back and fill that in because you cannot leave that blank. And you also can't use the anticipated date of transition because, as all of you know, or you will soon know, many times transitions are postponed. Many times you think someone's going home on a certain date and they don't. So this date needs to be correct. Every question on page 3, just go back a minute, Suzanne. Every question on page 3 is really important. Make sure to fill in the waiver affiliation, the target population, the qualified institution. All of these must be answered. Do they live with family? Every question, nearly every question on this page needs to be answered. Next slide. Now, page 4 of the survey is looking at the person's living situation. How long have you lived here? Do you like where you live? Just ask the questions and check off the answers. Module 2, further down on the page, looks at choice and control. Just continue asking the questions and recording the answers. Remember, you can rephrase and explain questions as needed for the participant. Now, many times when you're completing the QOL, the participant may tend to share all kinds of wonderful extra information. We ask that you refrain from writing side comments on the QOL. The QOL, remember, is a tool, and it's a survey tool, and it's not equipped to measure random comments. Remember, the survey is a data collection tool measuring specific information. Important information that comes up during a survey, and it will, needs to be documented in the contact note section of the database, not on the survey. And it needs to be followed up on accordingly. I would bring a pad of paper with me, and I would, when people share information that either I need to follow up on or it's important to know, I would use that pad to write down that information, but please do not write that on the survey. The survey is not equipped to measure that type of information. On page 5, the questions continue. The questions on page 5, module 3 starts. And in modules 3 and modules 4, these modules specifically address areas that could, depending on the answers, indicate possible abuse, neglect, or mistreatment. Remember, any instance of possible abuse, neglect, or mistreatment needs to be reported to the appropriate person. Throughout the survey, but specifically in modules 3 and modules 4, you'll see provide details lines after some of the questions. When a participant answers a question that has a provide details line after it, you need to use that line to provide details about why they answered the question the way that they did. If they don't offer more information, just ask them, can you tell me more about that? How did that happen? Why is that? But you need to ask for more information and fill in that provide details line. Keep in mind that these are specific questions that could indicate abuse and neglect, and unless the provide details line explains why the answer is not abuse and neglect, you will need to report it later on in the survey and complete module 10. Now, before we go on, I just want to point out question 8 and question 9. Are you always able to have a bath when you need one? And are you always able to have a meal when you need one? If the person says no, and almost everybody who's in a nursing home, for example, says no to this question. No, I'm not able to have a bath when I want one, and no, I'm not able to have a meal whenever I want one. You need to ask more information about this and fill in the provide details line. If the reason they said no is due to the facility's policy, you don't need to report it. All you need to do is to write that it's due to the facility's policy, or due to having, due to the facility's bathing policy. They give baths usually in a nursing home once or twice a week. If someone says, no, I want a bath every day, but they'll only give me a bath twice a week or once a week, you don't have to report that. It's unfortunately the facility's bathing policy. And the same with meal times. If you have someone, for example, who worked second shift and ate their meal at 12 midnight every day for, most of their life, they would say no to that question. I want my main meal at midnight, but they won't let me. They have scheduled meals. Then that's all you need to write, is due to the fact that the facility has scheduled meals. If, on the other hand, the person said no, when you ask the question, are you able to have a bath when you need one? And they said no, the nurse keeps telling me they don't have time to give me a bath. I haven't had a bath in 6 months. That would need to be reported, because that is not the facility's policy. That is not an acceptable policy, I should say.
Laurie, we have a question, and it's asking if we can review page 3. The click or check here is the person deceased. When and why would you use this?
Well, if this would be used primarily on the 11-month survey, because if the person dies in the nursing home, then they won't transition. So you wouldn't need it for a baseline. If the person, if you go to do an 11-month survey and you're told when you call to schedule the survey that the person has died, then you would be completing the first 3 pages of the survey. And that's when you would use this. You would check that, and you would write that the person's date of death, so that when someone tells you that they've died, I would ask when they died, or you can even Google an obituary and find out when they died. So that's the scenario where you would use this date of death. So on page 6, I just want to point out questions 10 and questions 11. Are you always able to take your medicine when you need it? And are you always able to use the bathroom when you need to? We get a lot of errors on these questions as well. These questions are not asking if the participant can do these tasks independently. They're asking, does the participant get their medication, and do they get to the bathroom when they need to, whether it's independently or with full assistance? I just wanted to clarify those 2 questions because, like I said, we get a lot of errors on those questions. I think we're so used to looking at people's level of independence, where this is really looking at, do they get their medicines, and are they able to do their, have their bathroom needs met? And remember, on this page, as well as throughout the survey, if on this page specifically, if the person says no to any question on this page, you need to ask for details and complete the provide details line. Also keep in, if there's a provide details line after any answer on the survey, you'll need to fill it out, and likely keep in your mind that you're likely going to need to report this as well to the appropriate person. Sometimes you can explain on the provide details line why it's not abusive. Number 11, for example, are you always able to go to the bathroom when you need to? And the person says no, and you ask for more information. Oh, why is that? And they say, I have to wait for my roommate. I have a shared bathroom. That is not necessarily abusive. I would just write exactly what the person said. I have to wait for my roommate, and I would also write shared bathroom. That says nice and succinctly that the person has to wait for their roommate. Number 12, on the other hand, do people help you? Do the people who help you treat you the way you want them to? The person said no. And when we asked for more information, they said, oh, some do, some don't, some are mean. That's something that would need to be reported. Staff should not be mean to participants. And it's not up to us to determine whether or not it's true or whether or not the nursing home has followed up. It's up to us to report it to the appropriate person. Number 13, do the people who help you listen carefully when you to what you ask them to do? This person said no. They're always in a rush. Some are rude. Larry always yells at me. Again, no one should be yelled at. This would need to be reported. If they simply said they're always in a rush, then personally, I wouldn't consider that necessarily abusive. But adding that Larry always yells at me, that definitely would need to be reported to the appropriate person. Also keep in mind that if there's an underlying pattern of questionable abuse or neglect or mistreatment, we're going to ask you to report it. All of these surveys go to the Department of Health, and if we miss something, then they will ask us to report it and to follow up on it. Next page, page 7, the same thing. Ask the questions, record the answers. For answers that have a provide details line after them, make sure to fill out the provide details line. You don't need to write a book. Just give us as much information as you need to explain the situation. I've used quotes on this for an example, but you don't have to. You can paraphrase. That's no problem at all. Page 8 of the survey. Another reminder, please, no side comments. Please stick to the questions. We have to read every single survey and we read every single comment. And then we have to figure out if it's relevant, figure out if you need to follow up. And no offense, but some people's handwriting, myself included, is not the best. So this ends up being a very time-consuming task. And remember, side comments are not data that is being collected, and they can't be measured the way the survey is written. So please don't use the survey as a contact note. If you look at the bottom of the page, this is an example of information that needs to be in a contact note. Medical transportation keeps sending a car, and she now uses a wheelchair. That's serious. That's important. That needs to be addressed. But you need to add that information in a contact note. Again, keep a piece of paper with you. Write down anything that needs to be followed up on. Surveys can be a catalyst for wonderful and important information and conversations. Most people seem to really enjoy doing surveys and will share all kinds of information. It's a great and incredibly useful way to gather information, but the information gathered needs to be recorded in a contact note, not on the survey. Page 9. Module 6 is on page 9, and it looks at overall life satisfaction. And Module 7 looks at health status. Just ask the questions and record the answers. Page 10 of the survey, the next two modules, Module 8, post-transition questions, and Module 9, reinstitutionalization. These modules are only completed for the 11-month surveys. If you're doing a baseline survey, you can skip these sections. You'll notice for section 30 or for question 30, have you ever talked to a case manager, a support coordinator, service coordinator about special equipment or changes in the home? And question number 31, do you need more help with things around the home? There's a provide details line after these questions as well. And if the participant answers yes to either question, you'll need to fill out the provide details line. Now, these questions also bring up things that could very well need follow-up. So if when the person says yes to these questions, yes, in the example of 30, do you need a additional equipment, and the person says, yes, I need a power chair. And when you ask for more information, you find out that he already asked the service coordinator for the power chair, and the service coordinator is also looking into seeing if they can get a power chair for the individual. You want to include that on that line, what they asked for and whether or not it's being looked into, because we will need to ask you that information. It's part of our job to make sure that people have we have at least looked into obtaining the items that people need to live safely in the community. So if you already know it's being looked into, or it's going to be looked into, or you've reported it to the service coordinator, just add that to the provide details line. I also want to point out on this particular question, I see a lot of people checking not applicable. And really, almost everyone that we work with has a care manager, a service coordinator, a social worker, a health home care manager. They have someone that they're working with. Some people don't. And if they don't have any services, then not applicable would be the correct choice. But if they have a service coordinator, a care manager, a social worker, then the answer, if they have not asked for additional equipment or they don't need additional equipment, would be no, not applicable, because it is applicable. If they wanted to, they could ask. And I just want to point that out because we do see that frequently. Page 11. Page 11 looks at Module 9, which is reinstitutionalization. This module is only completed for 11-month surveys. This is the second module. If you're doing a baseline, you skip. And this module looks at whether or not the participant has been readmitted to a hospital, a nursing home, or another institutional setting for at least a month during the last year. If the answer is yes, try to find out the dates, if you can, that they were in the hospital or the nursing home. And add this to a contact note. The Department of Health has asked us to track reinstitutionalization when somebody goes back in a nursing home or back in a hospital. And Laura Bingle and Tammy Loya spend a lot of time tracking this information for NILE. So if when you're doing this survey, you find that somebody was back in the hospital for a month over the past year, ask them for more information. If they're able to give it to you, add that into a contact note. And if the person is currently in a nursing home or a hospital, then number 35, you would put the date that they went into the nursing home, approximately the best that you can. And don't forget at the bottom of the page, the closeout section. The closeout section goes from the bottom of page 11 to page 12, and the closeout section must be completed for all surveys. There are 3 questions on the closeout section, question number 36, 37, and 38, and they all need to be filled in. It's easy to forget this section, especially if you're doing baselines, and we see this a lot because you're skipping over modules 8 and 9, but you're not done. You need to do this closeout section. Number 36, the contact information is especially important for baselines because sometimes this information can help you to locate the participant for the 11-month survey. Sometimes people are readmitted to nursing homes, they move, hopefully they tell us, but sometimes they don't. And the information you have on here can help you to locate them. At a minimum, put a name and a phone number. It can be a family member, a service coordinator, a care manager, a residence manager, anyone who might be able to provide some contact information about the individual. Number 37, how did you complete the survey? With the participant alone, with assistance, or by proxy? This is important not only because it tells us how the survey was completed, but if at all possible, we should complete the 11-month survey in the same manner that we've completed the baseline. If the baseline was done with the participant, then we should try to do the 11-month with the participant. And number 38 is the interview date. You'll note that's on there twice. I'm not sure why that is, but you need to complete the interview date, and it should match with the one at the beginning of the survey. And last, but certainly not least, towards the bottom of page 12 and page 13 covers Module 10. Module 10 must be completed whenever there's any indication of possible abuse or neglect. These instances are primarily reflected in the questions found in Module 3 and Module 4, the questions that are followed by a provide details line. However, the participant could indicate potential abuse or neglect at any time during the survey, and unless it is clearly explained on the provide details line why it's not abuse or neglect, you need to report the responses to the appropriate people. Each question in this section must be completed thoroughly and completely in the space provided.
Lori, we have a couple of questions.
Oh, okay.
Why do we put the interview date on page 2 and page 12?
Well, that's a good question. I'm really not sure. I have no idea why that is.
And we have
I think it's an oversight. My own feeling is it's an oversight. And the QOL is a Department of Health official form, so we can't change that. We can't just change a form. If it were our form, we would just update it, but we can't do that with the QOL. It's an official DOH form.
And we also have Kathy Sheehan has a question.
No, sorry.
Again?
Didn't
Okay.
mean to have my hand raised again.
Okay.
Okay.
Number 39, please describe the concerns in as much detail as possible. If you've already completed the provide details line, as you should have, you do not need to rewrite the same information. You can just write, there were concerns regarding, and then list the questions that the concerns came up on. Question 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever the questions were that reflect possible abuse and neglect. And then write details noted after the question. That tells the Department of Health, and it tells us here at NILE, that there were concerns on these questions and that the details are noted after the question. You don't need to rewrite everything you already wrote. Keep in mind, though, that you cannot write C survey. You have to write you have to list the questions that indicate the possible abuse or neglect. Number 40. This is where you put the name of the person that you've reported the responses to and their title. You need their full name and title. You cannot put Mary, social worker. You have to put their entire name. And it needs to be reported again to the appropriate person. You have to fill in the date the concerns were reported to the individual. And remember, we have 7 days generally, unless it's something that needs immediate attention. We have 7 days to report this. So this date that it's reported should be within 7 days of the day that you completed the survey. Number 42, the response of the person you reported it to. Just document whatever the person states when you tell them the concerns. Just give them a call, tell them that you completed the quality of life survey and there were some concerns that the participant mentioned during the survey that you are required to inform them on, and then let them know what the concerns were. If they say, when you inform them of that, if they say, okay, then that's what you write in 42, that was their response. If they say, oh, I had no idea, I'll follow up on that, then that's what you write. If they say that could not be possible, we are the best nursing home on the East Coast, then that's what you write. Keep in mind, they do not need to report back to you in any way. We are simply letting them know that these concerns were conveyed during the survey. It's up to them on how they follow up. And remember, this information is given to the Department of Health, and if they want additional follow-up on our end, they will let us know. We're really just reporting to the appropriate person what the participant conveyed to us during the survey.
All right, Laurie,
So
we have another question.
Okay.
Can you please clarify what needs immediate attention when you have suspected abuse?
Okay, if someone says to you, for example, oh yes, Larry on the night shift, it has attacked me. That's something, Larry is working at that nursing home, you would need to let someone know immediately. If they said, well, there was a staff person who, did something or was mean to me or something along those lines, something more vague, then, you could report that within the 7-day period. But if someone is in immediate danger or ongoing danger, they could, do the same to someone else. If someone says, for example, every night when I am put to bed, when the aide assists me putting me to bed, they push me around. If that's occurring currently, then I would say that's an immediate need that needs to be addressed immediately. And I would go right to the social work office or to the director of nursing or the administration office and try to talk to somebody right there. And if you can't find anyone, I would have the receptionist page them.
I think that's a really good point, Laurie, is that because you're in the nursing home, when you're doing these things, it should be fairly easy to find someone in an administrative position that you can report any kind of immediate concerns. If, however, you get the same kind of a response, but the person has already transitioned, if you've missed the baseline in the nursing home and now they're already home and they say to you, oh yes, while I was in the nursing home, Larry, was mean to me, that wouldn't be considered an immediate need to report. You could do that within the 7 days.
Yeah. Does that answer the question for everyone? If not, let me know.
All right. Kathy, I'm opening up your line. Does that answer your question?
I have a strong background in abuse, but Patrick seems a little skeptical.
Never mind.
No, you think like there needs to be more abuse training? I think that's what, more training on elder abuse or vulnerable.
That is another problem could have because people's own definition, they need to be clearly spelled out like social work and tell you boom, boom, boom what you need to do, not interpretation.
So we are not mandated reporters. However, we need to do due diligence. And so we tend to err on the side of caution. If there's ever a question about, is this possible abuse? Is this possible neglect? Is this possible anything? We would always err on the side of, let someone at the nursing home know, or let the service coordinator know. We're never going to not report something because I'm not sure whether it is or not. And as Laurie said, you can always call Niall. There's always somebody here that will answer if you really are on the fence. And again, the way we're going to err is toward the side of report, don't not report.
Letting the nursing home or the appropriate person know what's occurred.
Yeah, and there is an actually abuse neglect training that's available on the NILE website if you're more interested in the exact categories of everything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good questions. Any other questions on that? Okay. Then the next slide, before we leave this slide, I want to point out that the statewide administration team, that's Niall. And any time that you want to call us, you don't have to wait until a survey's put in, and you shouldn't. If there's a question or if there's something going on, let us know, and we're happy to help. So this is a copy of the QOL tab in the database, and just a couple things I want to point out. Make sure the date of the survey is correct. You'll see that date of the survey, and that's what I was talking about. If a survey is missed, you need the 15th day. If 11-month is missed, you need the 91st day. Try to get those dates correct. Keep in mind that if you complete a baseline survey, you cannot upload the baseline survey until you have confirmed that the person has actually transitioned. We run all kinds of reports from these particular fields. So you cannot upload the baseline QOL until the person has actually transitioned. You can store them in the document section of the database. That's a perfect place to store them, and just move them over once the person actually transitions. Baseline surveys, when you complete a baseline survey, that needs to be uploaded into the database within 30 days of transition. Once they've transitioned, you have 30 days to get that up, get the baseline uploaded into the database. And for 11-month surveys, they need to be uploaded within 30 days of completion or as soon as they've been missed or refused. Remember, we review every single survey, 3,825 or however many and counting. So try to upload the surveys as soon as you're able to. That would be greatly appreciated. Now, you may be wondering how on earth you're going to keep track of how and when all these QOLs are due. Well, you're in luck because we have a report in the database. It's called the Regional Lead and Transition Specialist Report. And you can run a report for a particular month or the whole year. And then just click on number 9, QOLs due, and you'll get a list of all the QOLs that are due for that year or that month, whatever you put in. Feel free to call me, and I'm happy to walk you through this. It's also a perfect thing for your Niall technical advisor to go over with you as well. It'll help you to keep track of your 11-month surveys. And your baselines you'll be able to keep track of much easier because you'll hopefully know when they're transitioning in most cases. Next slide. These are the hotline numbers that Suzanne and I were talking about. You can utilize these hotline numbers as needed. You can call us to see if you should utilize those, or you can just call yourself. But these are the hotline numbers. So that is the quality of life survey. It's really an important part of what we do. It's an important tool in our efforts to continue to break down the barriers and obtain the services that are needed for people to thrive in the community. Any questions, comments, remarks, anything anyone wants to add?
I'll just say thank you all for all your hard work. I know the quality of life surveys take time and take effort to track them and do them at the right time. So thank you everyone for doing that. Laurie, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. So we will close this out. And as Laurie said, always feel free to give a call if you have any questions. Sometimes you'll get questions as you start doing them. But thank you, everyone.
Yes, call anytime. We'd much rather have you call and learn to do them correctly and have your questions answered immediately. Thank you.